friend. It's Andra Zaharia, and I'm grateful you chose to be my partner in cyber empathy today. Journey with me through the lives and minds of people who prioritize connection, curiosity, and kindness in everything they do. Let's find out together how empathy cultivates hope, how it builds resilience, and helps us see how our actions influence others. It's time to unlearn stereotypes and see beyond technology to discover what truly makes our world safer. I'll help you carry over these insights and examples into your everyday practice. Promise. Let's go exploring, shall we? Hi there, listener. Ready to dive into a world where communication transforms relationships and self-understanding? In today's episode, we're getting up close and personal with the power of nonviolent communication. Imagine turning every conversation, even the tough ones, into a journey of connection and understanding. We've got with us Octavian Istrate, certified trainer with the U.S. Center for Nonviolent Communication, and he'll help us unpack the magic of this framework and reveal what it's all about, how it works, and where it makes the most difference. This deep dive into nonviolent communication explains how it can calm emotional storms and bring clarity to your deepest needs. Ever feel like your internal chat is your worst critic, for example? Well, you're not alone. We're also exploring how those empathy blockers we face with others can often show up in how we talk to ourselves. And there's even a real-life exercise that Octavian did with me that'll change how you think about these everyday chats. Plus, if you've ever wondered how to start this journey yourself, we've got some great recommendations and tips. Trust me, this episode is a game changer for anyone looking to bring a little more understanding, compassion, and authenticity into their life. Ready to transform the way you communicate? Make a bit of room in your mind and heart for this. So something that I wanted to start with for this very special episode is a recurring type of behavior that I see in cybersecurity, which is finding someone to blame. It's either the users, which is a term I don't necessarily like, but here we go, people. People are generally to blame because they clicked on something, they opened something, they installed something, they gave away information, they didn't read the terms and conditions. They did something and they're to blame. If they're not to blame, if someone else is, it's either cyber criminal groups or the CEO who didn't invest enough money. And this concept of blaming, I feel like it inhibits empathy and that it blocks connection. And something that I remember from reading Nonviolent Communication is this line about blaming and punishing others are superficial expressions of anger. And I was wondering how nonviolent communication principles can help us start to change this and to understand how we can move from blaming people to something that makes them open up instead of closing off.
Yes.
I like to start with big questions. So.
Yes. I've noticed that. Now I've noticed that. Blaming, it is, let's call it a superficial form of anger, but more importantly, behind every blame that I have towards myself or towards another people, there is an underlying unmet need. What I mean by underlying unmet need is these universal human needs. Like, for example, if someone did something and I blame them for it, I'm trying to put myself into the shoes of the cybersecurity guy that blames. It might be a need for being competent. I don't feel competent enough. I failed at doing my job. And this is underlying my consciousness. But I have a need to be competent. Or it could be a need for my work to have an impact. Every one of us wants to have an impact through our work. And when I see that the user gave that information, my need for having an impact is not met. There could be other needs. For each of us in every moment, we have different unmet and different met needs. And we are not taught in school or in education, or we're not taught to say, when I saw you that you gave your information through that email, something contracts in me and I get a little bit worried or scared, or I feel some pain, maybe, because I would really like to contribute and I value security, and I would really like my work to have an impact on the security of your information. It's a different message.
It's a completely different message. And thank you for this example, because I feel that sometimes we lack the words to say what we truly mean. Our vocabulary, it can be like really extensive in certain areas, but our emotional vocabulary is usually like really small and it lacks nuance. And it's taking me like a decade of on and off therapy to learn how to expand this vocabulary, and not just expand it, but actually use it and see what a difference that makes. But I wanted to share this from a bit from my experience. You have such an interesting background, and I wanted to tie this experience of you not only practicing the nonviolent communication principles, but understanding them and teaching them to others. What's your need, or what are your needs that this framework fulfilled, and how did you end up practicing nonviolent communication and making this kind of part of your life's work?
My needs for first learning, then practicing, and then teaching or giving to others nonviolent communication have changed. So throughout the years, it met different needs. I started from an extremely low point, let's say, with absolutely no emotional education. So you were talking about the emotional vocabulary. I had 2 words to describe my whole emotional life. I feel good and I feel bad. Those were my emotions that I knew of. But this was not an issue that I could see at that moment. At that moment, what hurt me the most was how I was getting into fights with people who I love. For example, talking about cyber empathy, my mother had lost in 2009, I think, her Yahoo password. She lost access to her account. And she asked me to create another account for her. And I said, yeah, Mom, but let's do you a Gmail account because Gmail is way better than Yahoo. No, I want on Yahoo. And I said, no, Gmail is way better. Trust me, I have both of them. No, I want on Yahoo. The conversation escalated. We started fighting. I started to throw arguments like, I finished computer science and I know what I'm talking about, and Gmail is way better than Yahoo. And you get into a huge fight. And after about 45 minutes, guess what I was doing? Almost crying of anger. I was creating her an Yahoo account. So basically, I was very angry. We had a huge conflict. And I didn't know at the time to look at her needs and to hear that she really values comfort and an interface that she knows and that she's used to. And the cost of doing the change is not worth for her. So she doesn't care about fancy features. She just wants it to work. And if I were able to hear it at that time, I could have seen, oh, okay, I can really understand why you want a Yahoo. Are you sure you don't want to try a new one? And if she would say, no, I don't want to try a new one, I would say, okay, I totally understand. Let's create you another Yahoo account. It would have taken 30 seconds. So I would offer still the Gmail, but I could have heard her needs behind the no, and then I could understand it.
So many conversations could go so much better if we had these abilities, which we can actually learn. So one of my key takeaways, my connection to nonviolent communication, was that our common friend Christina talked about a book. She really loved it and she recommended it. And I read it a couple of years ago, and it was such a powerful read. And it's packed with bookmarks, so many so that there's no point in taking notes, but rather rereading the whole thing again. And one of the things that stood out for me from reading the book was that it felt doable. So some of those things felt like, I could actually do this. I mean, it might not be easy at first to override like my behavior models, which are really set in, even though I'm just in my 30s. But I could learn these things. Like, I'm good at learning. This is something that I could do. And something that's very specific to people in the cybersecurity community is that they're very curious. They're great learners. So nonviolent communication is something they can do. And you understand this better than most because you actually have a background in IT and you understand, that type of thinking. How was it like for you to discover and to unpack these principles with your kind of thinking, with this methodical approach? What did that feel like?
It felt very organically. So for me, nonviolent communication I still think to this day that it was the best entry point to the personal development and let's call it therapeutic approaches. It's kind of a therapeutic approach, although it's not therapeutically designed. And the advantage of nonviolent communication is that it has something for the people who are very mind-based, how I was, extremely clear thinking, opening Excel files for every decision-making process, everything with sheets and stuff like that. And at the same time, it has something for the very emotional people. I got into the NVC through the intellectual stuff, through, for example, the distinction between the observation, stating the facts, and the interpretation or judgment. For example, if someone usually is late to a meeting, I can say at one side, you don't care about us. You really don't respect our group. That's a pure interpretation and a judgment. If I go on the scale, I can say you are always late, which is still an interpretation because probably it's not always that person is late. And then if I go on the scale even more, it's like you are usually late. And that might be true, but it's still an interpretation. But if I say the last 2 meetings, you were late for 12 minutes, and this is really the fact that they were late for 2 minutes, that's called an observation. That's called stating the fact. And for my analytical mind in the beginning, I loved that game to separate the judgment and the interpretation from the observation, from the what really happened there. And it might be not that, if I give another example, it's not that the client was not paying attention and clicked on something bad, let's say. It's like just they clicked on that link. They weren't paying attention. I don't know, maybe they were paying attention. And this was kind of a fun game to play for me for about 1 year. It took me about 1 year to really master the difference between the observation and the interpretation. And then I went into the needs, into the feelings, into making requests, which are other steps in the nonviolent communication process. But the fact that it's a process and that it has steps, and the steps are pretty clear, and they work most of the time, really helped me.
What changed for you when you finally felt like you integrated this skill, like you built the skill to separate observation from judgment? What changed for you? What changed for you in how you see people and how you see relationships and how you engage with them? What did it create for you that was better in your life?
In that moment, this small step, I want to make a disclaimer. This is just the first step, and it's not enough to use it in order to create a huge change in our interactions. But for me, it was the first step that I've learned because it was the only step that I could learn in that moment. So it was kind of the entry point towards the more important steps afterwards. For me, there were two benefits. First, inside myself, it reduced my emotional reactivity. When someone, let's say, cuts me in traffic and I get angry, if what goes in my mind is like, oh, he's such a jerk, he doesn't respect anyone in traffic, maybe all the people in this city are like him, that's gonna make my emotional reactivity even higher. And I'm getting emotional reactive as I'm talking. Maybe you can see in my voice and you can hear in my voice. But if I'm looking and say, oh, he switched the lanes and I needed to brake in order to provide safety for myself, that's different. That doesn't have the emotional charge. And it's exactly the same if we go on the being late example. The other benefit is that the other person agrees to what I'm saying. If I say, you don't respect this team because you are always late, they might not agree. They might say, oh, no, but 3 weeks ago at one meeting, I was on time and I was waiting for you 2 minutes. For example, no, I really care about you, but there's this thing that keeps me from coming on time. So they don't agree to what I'm saying. But if I'm saying, today you are late for 12 minutes and the last time you were late for 15 minutes, they will agree. That's what happened. So we already have a small connection. We are talking about the same thing. We have a common ground on what happened. We don't fight on what happened when we make observations.
I love that. I love that because it feels so attainable. It feels so practical. And I resonated with the road rage example so much. I used to be so very reactive to things that happened in traffic. My boyfriend would say, like, we get out of the house and you start like noticing everything that's wrong around you. And that's because I had many unmet needs and I wasn't a very good friend to myself. And you could feel that in the way that I saw others, behaved around others, judged others, and of course myself at the same time. And this distinction is so helpful, just making sure that agreement is in place before going on to the next step, before trying to change someone's mind. Make sure that they're paying attention to you, that they actually want to hear what you want to say. So you had this experience of following through the process. What are the next steps in the process that you mentioned that unlock like a lot of potential in terms of changing our behavior and being honestly just healthier by ourselves and in healthier relationships?
It's not only about the steps. I would like to take a step behind and just to explain in 3 minutes what nonviolent communication is.
Oh, yes, please. We probably should have started with that, but
yeah, but you connected me with some stories the old stories that resonate in me, and I love that. So nonviolent communication is let's call it a method of communication or an approach or a framework to communication created by Marshall Rosenberg. He was a clinical psychologist. I'm not sure how to define it, but I know some things that describe it really well. So the first thing is that it's a collection of intentions, principles, and tools. So we have intentions that are very important. We have some principles that we apply, and then we have the methodology, the technique, the actual process. Of course, the most important thing is the intention. If we just apply the process without the intention and without the principles, we probably will get disconnection. So that's at how it's built. It is designed to get a better quality of connection between people. So NVC has the intention of me hearing you without hearing any criticism or judgment from your side, you hearing me without hearing any criticism or judgment from my side, and then something shifts in our interaction. From that moment, we are much more open, both of us, to find a solution that works for me and for you at the same time. So it's designed, especially in times of conflict. If we already are connected and we're having fun and we get very well with each other, I don't see much of a benefit of using formally NVC. But if we're in a small conflict or we have a small disagreement, then it can really shift the interaction. So these are the theoretical parts. And if we go a little bit into the more practical details, we have 3 modes of using NVC. And I won't say the first one. One of them is expressing authentically, like I did with the example with being late. So when I saw that today you were late for 10 minutes, you arrived 10 minutes later than the scheduled time, and the last time you arrived 15 minutes later than the scheduled time, I'm a little bit worried that we won't be able to touch all the points that we have on the agenda. And I would really like to go in an optimal pace through the meeting. And maybe if I'm curious, I can ask why you arrived at that hour, and is something that we can do to support you in order to arrive on time next time. The request is different for every situation. So that's the authentic expression, it's called. It would also be authentic to say, oh, you're such an unreliable person and you don't care about anyone and you just care about your needs, and everyone on the team is pissed even though they don't say anything. That would be extremely authentic also, but it wouldn't provide connection.
And not helpful or be helpful in any way.
So this is one of the modes. The other mode is when I'm listening. So if we go with the same example into listening, it would be first to ask a question about why the person is late, or maybe first to ask consent about talking about it or setting a time to talk about it. So we have consent first. And then if we have consent, or when we have consent, to really listen and see what needs they are trying to meet by being late. Maybe they don't have enough safety and they unconsciously avoid some subjects, and this is why they are late. Or maybe their father is in the hospital and they go each morning to visit him, and then they get stuck in traffic. And then maybe if we move the meeting 20 minutes after or 30 minutes after, they will be able to be on time. We don't know the reason, but we want to listen to the reason in terms of needs and feelings and real humanity. And in order to be able to do these things, to express authentically or to listen with empathy, we need to be connected to ourselves. We need to know our needs, our feelings, what stimulates us in that moment, and what do we want from that situation being, let's say, in a behavioral way. So these three parts, authentic expression, empathic listening, and self-connection, are all very important. And we kind of, in nonviolent communication, we make a dance. First I self-connect, then I decide if I want to express or to listen. Let's say I decide to listen, I listen. After I'm listening, I'm feeding back what I've heard until the person really feels that she or he is heard. And then I can come back into myself and decide that I want to express now. And I say, okay, now I would like you to hear me. I heard you. So this is one possible way of going. Or I can start expressing, and if the other person hears me, that's perfect. If they don't, I can switch to listening, because in general, when people cannot hear me, they need to be listened first. Kind of the empathy is kind of one blocker here. And we do this by having 4 steps, but that's too technical for this discussion. We have 4 steps. But the important thing is the intention is to create a quality of connection, and we do this by empathic listening, authentic expression, and connection with ourselves. And we go through this over and over again up until we have connection.
That's such a helpful and such a clear overview. And thank you for tying this to an example that I think that everyone who's listening can resonate with. We all have, or we all are people who are sometimes late. And we've all, at some point in our lives, been frustrated by this type of behavior. To me, it is so fascinating what a difference language can make. But language that's rooted, like you mentioned, in a specific intent, in an intent of knowing that we're responsible for this intent, that we're responsible for the energy that we have when we walk into a room. I was reading Gabor Mate's The Myth of Normal, and he mentioned this crisis of maturity in terms of that there are many people in the world who are immature emotionally, first of all, which reflects in everything else, because knowing yourself, knowing that you can actively pursue a specific intent instead of be driven by automatic behaviors that we all have ingrained into our brains, is a matter of maturity. And what I see and you probably see this a lot more than I do, but what I see in people's resistance to change is a childlike behavior of a person who's like, but I don't want to change. Like, I don't want to do this unless they see like a really big benefit. So I understood like the benefit that first drove you, the fact that you were having all these little fights with people who are important to you. What drove you into the next stage of not only like reading about this, but actually, going through a nonviolent communication course and then becoming a coach yourself?
Yes, but first I had a reaction when you were impersonating the people who say, I don't want to change, I don't want to change. Now my first reaction would be, oh, I'm very curious why. What's stopping you? I would like to find out more. And I really value what's stopping you. And I'm just curious about what's blocking you. Not in order to put it on the side, but just in order to understand. That's what NVC brought me in all these years. But coming back to your question, so first it was something nice to play with, and my main motivation was to be able to find solutions that work for me and for the other. Because in general, in all my relationships, I was either winning or losing, but I wasn't able to find the win-win situation, the real win-win situation. And then I started to read the book, and I couldn't practice anything. I couldn't put anything into practice. So I needed to go to some trainings of nonviolent communication. And it was in the moment that I went into the trainings that I was really able to put it into practice. And there's a minority of people that really need to go into trainings to be able to put into practice NVC. Most of the people can practice to some degree without going to trainings, but I needed the trainings. And then during the trainings, I had the lived experience of a deeper human connection. And that's what drove me. It was like my intimate relationship. I was completely not able to be vulnerable before and to have intimacy. And I started to be able in some moments to have glimpses of intimacy. And that kept me going. With my colleagues and with my collaborators, the interaction was so much smoother, even if it was on the email, but smoother is the word. It was much easier. And with the clients, I was working only as a DJ at that time. And I remember when a bride told me at the end of the wedding that I was a point of anchor for her, and that the photographer and the videographer always told her what to do and put her into mud for photos, and they were very directing. And the guys from the venue, I don't know what they did. And she would just look at me, and if we have eye contact, and she would feel kind of understood. And we already built a relationship. We talked for about 3 times before. And she said that this helped her a lot. And this happened in, I think, 2014. And that's when I realized, oh, this helps with the clients also.
That's such a beautiful example to have someone as your emotional anchor on a day that's so emotionally intense and that really takes it out of you in every way. That is just such a wonderful story. Besides the fact that your experience is just wild and so interesting. I mean, like a background in tech studies, like in STEM, and then DJing, and then becoming a change strategist that works with people. I love the transition between all of that. And many people in cybersecurity resonate with that type of unsuspecting life stages and unsuspected turns and twists along the way. So that was, again, that type of change, seeing those relationships go smoother. I feel like it takes away so much tension. It also creates some distance between our reaction or our perception and the way people behave near us. And I actually have an example. Earlier today, I was in like public transportation and people were very tense. because the tram was late. And people were like fuming. I could hear them like clenching their jaws near me. And while it still affected me, because it does, I can't help but soak up some of the things that happen around me, I was better at noticing that I'm doing that. And I was able to like take a deep breath and relax my shoulders a bit and see if I'm clenching my jaw. And I was. And figure out that like, it's okay. We all go through this, but I don't have to soak that up and then take that home, which is what I would have done a while ago. And while that's not it's a result of therapy, not of NVC, which is something that NVC stands for Nonviolent Communication. I don't want to use acronyms that people don't understand. So what I do want to pursue a deeper learning path with nonviolent communication, which is why I'm really glad I met you. I'm also interested in offering listeners some other practical things that they could try in their relationships, in their work life, in writing emails, whatever it is. Some practical things that they could experiment with and see what happens. Because I know that this goes a lot deeper, and I would love to do a part 2. I'm sure that listeners would love it as well. But until next time, I'd like to take advantage of the time we have together to dive into some of the nuts and bolts that tie intention to these behaviors that we can actually develop.
Yes. But first, is it okay if I make another disclaimer before going to the practicalities? Because I find it very important. So I entered the personal development world through NVC, and it helped me a lot in getting from basically having no meaningful connections to have connections most of the time. But it came a point, and that point for me was 2020, when I realized that NVC cannot help me in some areas, in some specific areas. And that's when I started to become a client of psychotherapy. And that helped me a lot. So they don't exclude each other, but they complement each other very well, because NVC is a practice that you can do also on your own or in a training, and it helps you build the baseline of the emotional abilities. But then for specific situations that are very triggering, NVC has some limitations. So those are best to be taken into a psychotherapeutic relationship.
But it's a great way to discover them, isn't it? Because it makes you reflect on your own behavior. And if you start asking, why am I doing this?
Over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. Why am I doing this? But why? Start with why and ask why 5 times. That works really well. It really does. There's a world of knowledge and help out there that could make us better. And if we're able to be better with ourselves, we can be better with others. And that means we can create that change that we want, like you mentioned, to make sure that our work has an impact, to go home not drained, but instead fulfilled and energized because we connected with people, because we were there for each other and we did things and we accomplished things together. And that's something that's so beautiful and precious and worth pursuing, even if it's hard for us to work on this ever interminable process of change. So what's something that you've seen people do after you've trained them on nonviolent communication? What are some of the types of reactions that you saw during trainings, like the ones that you had? You mentioned that you had those moments of connection and you realized oh, this is what it feels like. And it's really beautiful.
So thinking on a practical side, there are basically 2 ways to go using nonviolent communication, and it depends on the type of person. So this is just my theory. This is not from nonviolent communication. It's just what I've noticed. There are basically, let's say we can separate people into categories. The ones that take care of their needs pretty well, and they are not able to hear other people, and they would benefit from some practical advice on how to listen. Although all of us would benefit from some practical advice on how to listen. And then there's the empaths, the people who are listening and always taking care of the needs of others, and they would benefit from more self-connection and authentic expression in order to make a balance between these sides. So I'm not sure which one to pick first.
Let's start with the listening part, because like you mentioned, it's something that we all need. I talked about my experience with going through Andrei's supernatural listening workshop, which was extremely interesting. And as it turns out, I was and still am in certain ways a very bad listener, especially to my partner, who he's just one of the people in this world that I love the most. And I sucked at listening to him. I still do, but I've made some improvements. So at least there's hope. So perhaps we can start with that.
Yes, let's start with that. And I just wanted to let you know that join the club, because for most of the people, including me, it's the most challenging to listen to the people who are closest to us and we love the most. So this is how it is. So practical tips or ways to listen better. I would start with the intention. That's the most important thing. And in order to be able to keep this intention, my first suggestion is to put a time limit on it. So let's say I will just listen for 5 minutes. Or maybe 5 minutes, I know it's too much for me, maybe for 1 minute or for 2 minutes. I wouldn't advise people who are not specifically trained in listen to attempt to listen more than 10 minutes. It's usually too much. We lose our attention in 10 minutes. So first I would say that, okay, I would like to listen to you for 5 minutes and just to listen to you, to be present with you. That's the intention. I would like to hear you as you are right now. I wouldn't like to hear what I think or how you were in the past. So on the timeline scale, I want to be connected with you right now. What happens in you now? And then NVC has these 2 beautiful steps that are feelings and needs. I would like to extract the feelings and needs from what you are telling me. And these 3 things, if I have the intention to listen to you for a specific time, to hear what's happening in you now, and to really distill your experience into feelings and needs, this will automatically clear my mind out of judgments and interpretation. They won't have a place. It's not like I'm trying to get rid of the judgments. It's just that they don't have a place.
You mentioned something that you want to try, and I'm all for it. You mentioned that you want to try having a real life exercise of what this feels like and how it works. So I'm here. I'm your test subject. Please, please use me. I would love to give people just a real life situation. So
my question would be, if you have a situation at work or personal, whichever you feel it's more suitable for the audience, that bothers you, and it needs to be medium in intensity. So if it's too low, you won't have the charge enough. But if it's too high, it could be too much. A medium to high, let's say 6, 7, 8 on a scale of 1 to 10.
I do have plenty of those because I do have a rocky relationship with my mother, something that's kept me in therapy for a while, but also one of the sources of growth, of a lot of personal growth for me, because I've had to figure things out. And one of the things that she did, just the other day.
Is it okay if I interrupt you just for a second? Let's do first a demo of how my mind would think if I wouldn't know NVC and if I were to speak it out loud. So Octavian before NVC and without any censoring on the mouth side. Is it okay if we try this first?
Absolutely, absolutely. Like I would tell a friend, she asked me the other day to help pick a new desk for her. She gave me these options and I told her I'm going to get back to you this evening. I have a full day And she told me like, yeah, I'm going to think about it and I'll message you afterwards with, what I'm thinking, like what my choice is. I get home very late because I'd had like a really full day and I was pretty wiped out. She hadn't messaged me, but she does send me this message telling me that I can't believe you're so uncaring. I told you I need help with this and you don't even care enough to look over these options.
Yeah, that happened to me so many times. The people in this time just have this entitlement of I'm kind of a slave to them. I need to respond immediately. It's awful. They have this entitlement thing.
Yeah, that's what I felt. That was my first reaction. My first reaction was like, you said you'd message me. You said you would pick one and then I would help you confirm. What is up with this? Why don't you care that I felt like...
But why do you put up with her? Why don't you just cut the ties with her? It sounds like she's not a good fit for you.
That's kind of true. Yeah, that was my reaction for a long time.
Okay, let's stop for a minute. Please let me know what was inside you, what happened inside you when I was responding in this way to you.
Things became more intense, actually. And I felt like it kind of activated in me that sort of reactivity and the desire to have justice and to just be done with this kind of tension and with this kind of repetitive behavior that it's taken so much energy for me to manage over the years. A lot, just too much. Yeah, ideally, I felt and thought of exactly the words and actions that you mentioned in your replies for many, many years.
So even if I used some, what we call in NVC, empathy blockers, we still got some connection because somehow the blockers that I was using were alive in you. So basically, if I'm explain what I did here, in MVC, we have a list of blockages of connection. And this is giving advice. If I'm giving you advice without listening first, it's probably about me. It's something in me that I can handle and I want to fix you. Or if I start analyzing you, why does this happen with your friend? Maybe it has something to do with your mother relationship. That also is an empathy blocker. If I'm starting to tell a story when I went through something similar without listening to you first, again, I'm taking the attention from you and putting on me. Or if I'm even worse, saying, oh, you think you got it bad. Let me tell you what happened to me last week. Or if I say, oh, come on, it's not that bad. Your reactivity doesn't match the situation. It's something. You shouldn't be so affected by this. Or maybe, oh, yeah, but did you see the match yesterday evening with all the kids on the stadium? And maybe I changed the subject. These are all methods of taking the attention from you and putting it on me, on or other thing, or deflecting it. And we do this sometimes with the best intentions. Sometimes I want to help you, but maybe it's not yet the time to tell you an advice, or maybe I didn't ask for permission to tell you an advice.
I saw myself in all of those. I'm sure that we all do these things and we don't realize the huge effect that they have in spite of our good intentions. Because like you mentioned, practice without intention, it's not helpful, but also having good intention but poor practice, that's also gonna not work out.
It's not optimal, yes. So are you willing to give me a second chance of listening and start again? And I will set my intention this time to really hear you and to focus on your feelings and needs. This is just for transparency, what I'm going to do.
So again, I had this conversation, which was through messages, but I could feel the tension behind it because my mom likes to go fast and she likes to make fast choices and she wants to pick a desk today. And I told her that I can't do it right now. Although for the longest time I did, which enforced this type of reaction and expectation. And when I got home in the evening, instead of her doing what she promised, that she would message me with her final selection, I just got a message being called indifferent and uncaring because I didn't bother to reply and ask if she'd picked something and, whatever the next steps are. That just made me angry in a moment where I was already tired and felt the need to just like unwind. And yeah, so that type of repetitive behavior is really, really hard to see and not be able to influence in any way.
So basically, in that moment, you were probably first surprised and then angry because maybe, I'm just guessing, you would have liked to be seen for your intention to help. And that wasn't seen.
Not only was that not seen, but I was actually the so-called victim of false expectations and of lack of follow-through on her side. So I honestly felt like I didn't do anything, but I still like got the bad part of this all thrown at me.
So you had also a sense of unfairness.
Yes, deep unfairness.
Which is also linked with being seen. You would have liked to be seen for this, and it's linked with maybe reciprocity of the follow-up. My guess is that in all relationships, you would like not only you to do the follow-up, but other people to do the follow-up and check what's going on with you. Or
yeah, especially if they promise like, I'm going to do this. And then they come at me with an entirely different expectation and the reproach of it all, then it gets really tough. It does.
So basically what stimulates you is changing the rules as the game progresses. It's like you would like people to follow what they say that they're going to do what they say that they're going to do.
Yeah, I do have a very high need for certainty. Because I've had a very emotionally troubled childhood and adolescence. So yeah, not having that clarity and just some sort of stability in the sense is something that's very triggering to me. It's true.
So basically stability and certainty and maybe reliability, or knowing what's going to happen and trusting that it's going to happen, are kind of very important needs for you.
Yes, they really are. I felt myself calming down talking about this. Like I felt myself coming down from this emotional high to clarifying again some of the things that are really important to me and some of the things that I need in my life, and acknowledging that and what that looks like and what that feels like, but not necessarily in a way that might make me turn against myself and say, like, yeah, but you have an exaggerated need for stability and certainty. Like, you should be more open to whatever. Because the thing is that what I've noticed, and I just realized this now, is that these empathy blockers, these connection blockers that you mentioned, we have those with ourselves. We tell ourselves we should be somehow. We give ourselves advice. We deflect in our internal conversations. It's like, how do we spend so much time being so blame driven, so just punishing with ourselves? How do we expect ourselves to be like great with others and kind and empathetic and patient if we can't offer ourselves the same thing first?
And I would add that having compassion to ourselves and real acceptance to ourselves is a skill that we can build. And at the same time, there are situations in every one of us' lives in which we cannot hold the space for ourselves, just ourselves. So then we need someone else that listens to us, really understands us, and with their help, we are able to accept those things in ourselves, but on our own, it would be very hard. And now you had 2 minutes or 3 minutes or how long it was, this exercise in which I was with you and I was seeing you. And this really expands your container, makes you able to hold it in a different way than you would have been able to hold it on your side, on yourself.
That's so true. So true. Our conversation is kind of coming to a close, not because I want to, but because, again, time boxing things like you mentioned as a practical tip. But I really would love to do this again. And thank you for being so generous with your time and insights. And thank you for being so open and vulnerable about your own experiences and how this framework helped you and in what stages, in what way, and also being honest about limitations. I really, really appreciate that. And I was wondering if people want to learn more about nonviolent communication, what would you advise that they do next after listening to our conversation?
Is it okay first I take 1 minute to just explain what happened in the last exercise? So basically what happened was that you were speaking something, what I called an info-emotional message. And when it was finished, I told you what I've heard in the terms of feelings and needs. And if you've noticed, after the first me feeding back what I've heard, you said, yeah, that's it, but it's not only that. And you started to talk about the second layer. And then I feeded you back the second layer. And then you said, oh yeah, and it's just this from my childhood. And that was the core. That was the core needs of safety, of predictability, of reliability, of being able to trust. And we wouldn't have gotten to the third layer if I would have given you advice on the first. And that's why it's really important. And if you have the skill, it only takes 5 or 10 minutes. So it's not a huge investment of time, and it builds trust and safety in the relationship. And then if we were to be colleagues, you would have more trust in me when doing something, and I would have more trust in you because you showed these parts to me. So we would have a more easy collaboration if we were to work together in just 5 minutes.
That's fantastic. And that's such a generous thing that we can do for one another.
Exactly. So thank you for allowing me to have this explanation. Coming back to the question where people can learn more, the first thing is the book, The Nonviolent Communication, A Language of the Heart, written by Marshall Rosenberg. It's a very good starting point, and it's a very good, if you go to a training, to read the book while going to the training or after. And then it's the trainings. And this is very, very person specific. So some people prefer taking NVC trainings in person, face to face. It has a different quality. For someone else, it could be perfectly online. And what I suggest is to find, it would be best if it's a certified trainer, because they've gone through a process of 3 to 5 years of really understanding the depths of NVC and the subtleties of NVC. And the most important thing is to resonate with that person. Try to find, even if it's online, even if it's on a different time schedule, it doesn't matter. But to find a person that you have the intuition and the sense that, oh, I could really learn from her or from him. And then start with that person. It doesn't matter what kind of training you do so much, because this is something pretty deep, and it doesn't matter if it's personal or if it's professional, because the abilities are switchable from one side to another. But you really need to feel openness towards the trainer. And then after you have completed one training, my suggestion is to change the trainer in order to see other perspectives. I'm not sure if this is very helpful.
It is. It really is. And thank you for sharing that.
I have another few books on the subject. The first one is called The Empathy Factor. I'm not sure who written. The title is Empathy Factor, and it talks about empathy in organizations. It's a pretty big book. And another one is called Words That Work in Business. And this is a very short one, very practical oriented one, written by a lawyer who then learned MVC. And this is very, very grounded in reality. And it's very short. So Words That Work in Business by Ike Lasseter or something like that.
I'll include the links in the description so everyone can get the books. And I'm going to read The Empathy Factor myself. I think it's on my to-read list, but that to-read list is really long, so it may have gotten buried there. But thank you for surfacing it. That's something for me to dig into. Octavian, I cannot wait to do this again. And I cannot wait to listen to our conversation again, because I have a lot more things to learn from you. I appreciate your time and your energy today. You are just such a calming thoughtful, present, and such a great example for what we can achieve if we spend some time searching what works for us, I guess, and practicing that. So thank you.
Thank you also. It's been very vitalizing for me also. I enjoyed it a lot.
Hey, congrats! You made it until the end of this episode. Thanks so much for listening. And if you want to get the show notes and see the transcript and get other resources, head on over to cyberempathy.org. You'll find all of the episodes there and resources to help you have a more comfortable relationship with technology and security. Also, if you want to contact me, all my details are on there. And I'll see you soon. Bye!